Verna Tolliver was 41 years old, a widow, and she had just picked a full crop of cotton off 40 acres of the Cathcart Bend. They handed her the settlement ticket on the commissary porch. She read it once. It said that after a whole year's work, after every bowl pulled by her own 2 hands and her children's, she owed the place $186.40. She did not argue. She did not raise her voice. She folded the ticket once along the crease and slid it down into her apron pocket. Now rewind one night. At the account desk, lamp turned low, Emmett Cathcart had laid his hand over hers on the open ledger. She stepped back. And he said it plain. A woman who won't be neighborly can find another county to starve in. By dawn, the word eviction was passed down the settlement line. 40-odd tenant families waiting their turn all heard it. That night, Verna reached up and took down her husband's old Arbuckle coffee tin. 6 years of dated furnished tickets, kept in the dark, that not one soul knew about. She laid them beside the figure the courthouse said she owed. And the 2 numbers did not come from the same man's hand. If you believe quiet people read the fine print, this story is for you. Before we go on, do me one kindness. Subscribe to the channel, and in the comments, tell me the town you're watching from tonight. I want to see how far this story travels. Now, let me take you back to the beginning, and let me tell it slow. Renfro sat in Halford County, down in the Arkansas Delta, and in the fall of 1936, it was mostly flat cotton land and dust. The Depression had its hand on everybody's throat, but some throats it squeezed harder than others. Verna worked 40 acres of the Cathcart Bend on halves. That meant the landlord took half the crop, and she kept half, minus everything she had been furnished through the year. Seed, meal, coffee, a plow point when the old one broke. It all went on the book at the commissary, and it all came out at settlement. Her husband Tom had worked that same ground before her. Tom had died 2 springs back, took quick by a fever that no doctor came for in time. He left her the 2 children, the mule, and a way of doing things. Tom kept things square. Verna kept them squarer. She had a girl of 11, Cora, quiet like her mother, and a boy of 9, little Tom, who could already chop a straight row. They lived in a gray board house at the edge of the bend with the door hung true and the yard swept clean. Now here is the thing you have to understand about Verna Tolliver. She could read. And not just read a Bible verse slow on a Sunday. She could read a column of figures and follow it to the bottom and tell you where a nickel had gone. One winter, back when Tom was living, the commissary clerk had taken sick and gone off to Memphis. And for that whole season, Cathcart had needed somebody to keep the daybook. Somebody with a clean hand and a head for numbers. Verna did it. She sat at that desk and wrote down every furnish that went out to every family on the place. So she knew the hands. She knew the widow Amos and old Silas Hobbs and the Renfro cousins and every soul that traded at that store. And she knew something else. She knew the Crop-Lien law. She had seen how it worked from the inside. A tenant borrows against a crop not yet grown. The landlord files a lien on it at the courthouse, and until that lien is paid, the tenant cannot sell a bale to anybody but the man who holds the paper. Most tenants never saw the courthouse book. Most tenants could not have read it if they had. But Verna could. She just never thought she would need to. People loved her, and they loved her for good reason. When old Miss Dosia got too stiff to walk to church, it was Verna who came with the wagon every Sunday and lifted her up onto the seat like she weighed nothing. When the Renfro boy borrowed a peck of seed corn in a hard spring and could not pay it back, it was Verna who told him to forget it. That seed was meant to be planted and not counted. She did not have much. But what she had, she shared, and she shared it easy. And she had a habit, a small one. Her husband Tom had always saved every furnished ticket, every little scrap of paper the store gave when it handed something across the counter. He kept them in an empty Arbuckle coffee tin up on the shelf by the stove. When Tom died, Verna kept the habit. Every ticket, folded, dropped in the tin. She never counted them. She never once thought she would need them. It was just Tom's way, and keeping it was a way of keeping him. That tin sat on the shelf and gathered 6 years of paper. Remember it. Now come to the account desk with me in the last week before the crop came in. It was evening and the store was empty. The lamp on the desk was turned down low, the way Cathcart liked it, so the numbers swam a little on the page. He had the big ledger open. He wanted to go over her furnish before settlement, he said. Just the two of them. Verna stood at the counter with her hands folded. She was reading the book upside down, the way she always could, and the figures were not sitting right with her even then. But she said nothing. It was not her place, and it was not her book. Cathcart came around the counter. He was a heavy man in his 50s, gone soft in the middle but hard in the eye. And he carried himself like a little king, because on that land he was one. He stood too close. He put his hand down over hers on the open ledger, warm and slow, and let it rest there. Verna took her hand back. She stepped away from the desk. She did not gasp or scold. She just moved, one clean step, and let the space say it. Cathcart's face did something ugly then. He was a man not used to a door closing on him. And he said the words that started everything. A woman who won't be neighborly, he said, can find another county to starve in. Verna said nothing at all. She turned and walked out of that store and down the road home in the dark, a mile of it, with the frogs going in the ditches and her heart going harder than her feet. The only witness to what happened at that desk was the open daybook, and a daybook cannot testify. She did not tell a soul. That was her mistake, and her nature. She believed that if she stayed quiet and stayed square, it would be protection enough. She believed a person who did no wrong could not be much harmed. She was about to learn different. The furnish price started to creep after that. Small at first. So small you would have to be watching close to catch it. A plow point showed up on her ticket. $2 for a plow point she never took. She had mended her own that spring with a piece off Tom's old one. But there it was, in the book. Coffee charged at double what the shelf said. A sack of meal she was sure she had paid cash for, sitting on the book anyhow like she had furnished it. Verna noticed. Of course she noticed. But a tenant who accuses the landlord of padding the book is a tenant looking for a fight she cannot win. So she filed it away. She kept quiet. She waited for settlement, when the whole thing would be laid out and she believed could be talked through like reasonable people. It was on one of those trading days that Silas Hobbs said the thing that should have woken her all the way up. Silas was an old man, past 70, with hands like tree roots and a back bent from 60 years in the rows. He could not read one word. But Silas Hobbs could count. He had counted his own bales, in his own head by memory, for 30 years, and no gin man had ever once caught him wrong. He was the oldest tenant on the bend, and, in a way nobody said out loud, its spine. He was waiting his turn at the counter, and Verna was near, and he leaned over and said it low, half to her and half to the air. 3 years now, Silas said. I've been carrying furnish on that book I never once drew. Meal I never toted home. Cloth my wife never cut. He shook his old head. But I can't read the marks, so what's an old man to say? Verna heard it. And something turned over in her mind, slow, like a stone in a field. Not just her ticket then, not just her. She did not have the whole shape of it yet. But you, watching, you can already see it, can't you? You can see the machine turning before Verna can. That's the way of these things. The one being robbed is always the last to see the size of it. She tucked Silas's words away with her own suspicions, and she said, Gentle, count your bales, Silas. Count them careful this year. And he said he always did. Then came Settlement Day. Settlement Day was the biggest day on the whole calendar of the Bend. It was the day the year came due. Every family carried its crop to the gin, and the bales were weighed, and the landlord read out from his book what you had made and what you owed, and told you what was left. For most families, in a hard year, what was left was little or nothing. For some it was a debt carried into the next year, which is how a man stays a tenant his whole life and dies owing. The commissary porch was crowded, wagons in the yard, children on the steps. 40-odd families, the whole settlement, come to hear their year read out. Verna stood in the line with Cora and little Tom close by her skirts. She was not worried, not truly. She had made good cotton. Her bales were clean and heavy. She had picked out a full crop, and she had furnished light all year because she was careful. By her own reckoning, done at her own table, the place owed her money. Not much, but something to carry the children through the winter. Cathcart sat at a table on the porch with the big ledger open and Luther Pruitt standing at his shoulder. Luther was the riding boss, the overseer, a raw-boned man who did Cathcart's porch work and Cathcart's road work and got in return the thing he wanted most, which was to stand a little above the men he'd grown up beside. Luther enforced. Luther was the one who came to your house. Luther signed his name where Cathcart told him to sign it and did not read what he was signing and thought that made him clean. The line moved. Family by family. Verna heard the numbers read out ahead of her, and she heard the small sounds men make when a year of work comes to nothing. Then it was her turn. Cathcart ran his finger down the column. He did not look up at her. He read it out in a flat voice for the porch to hear. Tolliver, he said, after settlement of furnish against crop. He paused. You owe the Bend $186.40. The porch went quiet. Verna felt the quiet more than she heard the number. She stepped forward. Calm, her voice level. Mr. Cathcart, I'd like to see the figures. I made a full crop. I'd like to see how it comes to that. And this is the moment. This is where the whole story turns on its hinge. Because Emmett Cathcart, in front of 40 families, closed the book. He shut the ledger. He did not open it and show her a single line. He looked at her, and then he looked past her at Luther, and he said, loud enough for the porch, Luther, see that the Tolliver house is cleared by Saturday. We'll want it for a family that means to work. That was it. That was the whole of it. She had stepped back from his hand at the desk, and this was the bill for it. He was turning her off the land. Not because she owed. She did not owe. He was turning her off because she had told him no, and because a man like that cannot let a no stand where the whole place can see it. Verna did not cry out. Her children were on the steps, and the whole settlement was watching, and she would not give him her breaking to keep. She reached down and picked up the settlement ticket he had slid across the table. She folded it once, along the crease. She put it in her apron pocket. She took Cora by the hand, and she took little Tom by the hand, and she walked down off that porch, and through the yard, and out to the wagon. And 40 families watched her go, and not one of them said a word, because every one of them owed him too, and every one of them was afraid. That was the peak of it, the public wound. Now watch what she does with it. They cleared out by Saturday. Because when a man like Cathcart says a house will be cleared, it will be, and the sheriff of Halford County was his hunting friend, and there was no law on the Bend but him. Verna packed the wagon, the bedstead, the trunk, the good chair Tom had made, the stove they could not take, that belonged to the house, and up off the shelf by the stove she took down the Arbuckle coffee tin. 6 years of paper rattling soft inside it, and she wrapped it in a dish towel and set it in the trunk, and she did not right then know why it mattered. Only that it was Tom's, and she would not leave it for Cathcart. They moved into a rented room over the Renfro feed store in town. One room, a curtain to split the children's pallet from her bed, a window that looked down on the street. It was a long fall from 40 acres and a swept yard to one room over a feed store, and Verna felt every foot of it. But she did not let the children see her feel it. She took in wash. That is a hard, mean way to make a living, wash, bent over a tub and a board from before light, hands raw and cracked, hanging other people's clothes on lines across the room in winter because there was no yard. She took in wash, and she made it do. The children went to the town school, which was a thing the Bend had never had, so there was that. Cora took to it. Little Tom fought it, but went. And at night, when the children slept, Verna sat at the one table by the one lamp. And one night, weeks in, she took the Arbuckle tin down off the shelf where she'd set it, and she took the lid off. She had never counted them. In 6 years she had never once counted them. She poured them out on the table, the whole drift of little folded tickets, some gone soft and gray at the folds. Tom's handwriting on the old ones and her own on the newer, and she began to smooth them flat, one at a time. Every furnish she had ever taken from the Cathcart Bend commissary. Every sack of meal and pound of coffee and yard of cloth, dated, most of them priced. Tom had saved them out of nothing but habit. She had kept the habit out of nothing but love. Neither of them ever thought a scrap of them would matter. She sorted them by year. She added them by year. She had a clean hand and a head for figures, and she had once kept this very man's book, so she knew how to do it right. She added her true furnish for the whole last year, every item at the true shelf price, the price she had actually paid. And then she took out of her apron the settlement ticket, folded along its crease, and she smoothed it flat beside her own sum. $186.40, his figure said. Her figure, her true furnish for the year, did not come near a third of it, and against it stood her half of a full, clean crop of cotton, good bales, that his book had somehow swallowed whole. The two numbers did not come from the same man's hand. Hers came from the truth. His came from somewhere else. Verna sat very still in that lamplight. She was not a woman given to anger. But something cold and clear was moving in her now, and it was better than anger, and it would last longer. She did not yet know how far it went. She thought, that night, that she had been robbed. One widow, cheated by a spiteful man over a hand pulled back from a desk. She thought it was hers alone. She was about to find out it was not. She rode the mule to the courthouse. She told the children she was going to town to pay what was owed, which was a thing a square person did, and which was also a reason that would raise no dust if it got back to the Bend. She wore her church dress. She rode the 11 miles into the county seat with the tin's true figures written on a paper folded in her glove. The courthouse was a brick building with a green dome and a smell of old paper and floor oil. Verna had been in it twice in her life. She found the recorder's office, a long room with tall books on shelves, and a thin clerk behind a counter who looked at a tenant woman in a church dress and did not much see her. "I'd like to see the lien filed against me," Verna said. "Against my crop. Tolliver, Cathcart Bend." The clerk looked put out. But it was a public book, and the law said a public book must be shown, and Verna knew that law even if the clerk wished she didn't. He brought down a great ledger and set it on the counter and turned it to the T's and put his finger on a line and turned it around for her to read. And Verna read it. There was a crop-lien filed against her. Against the Tolliver crop. For an advance of furnish. For a sum. And at the bottom of the entry, where the borrower's mark should be, there was an X. A borrower's X mark, the way an unlettered tenant would sign. But Verna Tolliver could write her own name. She had written it 1,000 times. She had kept this county's biggest merchant's own daybook in her own clean hand. She had never made that X in her life. She had never borrowed that advance. She had never signed for it. And there, beside the mark she never made, in the space for the witness, was a name written out plain. Luther Pruitt. Witness, Luther had witnessed a mark that was never made. He had signed his name to a lie, and most likely he had never even read the lie he signed, because Luther signed where he was told and asked nothing. Verna stood at that counter, and she felt the floor of the thing drop away beneath her. It was not padding. It was not a spiteful nickel here and there. It was forgery. A forged debt, filed at the courthouse, in the public book, under a mark she never made, witnessed by a man who never saw her make it. It was a debt manufactured out of nothing and made law. And a forged lien is a chain. Under that lien she could not have sold a bale to any man but Cathcart. Under that lien she was bound to his land, his store, his book, for as long as the paper stood. He had not just cheated her 1 year. He had built a paper cage and filed it with the county, and the county had stamped it real. Her hand, in her glove, closed on the paper with her true figures written on it. She kept her face still. She had learned to keep her face still. But then she did a thing, a small thing, a thing that turned this from one woman's grievance into something a great deal larger. She slid a dime across the counter to the clerk. "I'd like to see a few others," she said. "It's a public book, I'll pay the fee." The clerk sighed. But a dime was a dime and the book was public. "Which ones?" he said. "Hobbs," she said. "Silas Hobbs. And Amos, the widow Amos. And Renfro." And she named a dozen more, every family she could think of off the bend, every name she had once written in Cathcart's own daybook with her own hand. And the clerk, sighing, turned the pages, and one by one Verna read them. Silas Hobbs. A lien for a furnish advance far past anything old Silas had ever drawn. An X-mark. Witnessed Luther Pruitt. Silas, who counted his own bales in his head for 30 years and never once came up wrong, and who had told her, lo, that he'd carried furnish 3 years he never drew. The widow Amos. A lien. An X. Luther Pruitt. Witness Renfro, a lien. A mark. Luther Pruitt. Down the line. Family after family. The same padded, swollen, invented debt. The same X where a tenant who could not read had, so the book claimed, made his mark. The same witness signed over and over, Luther Pruitt, Luther Pruitt, Luther Pruitt. A man setting his name to lie after lie and asking nothing. Every family on the Cathcart Bend. Bound, caged, held to that land not by an honest debt they could work off, but by a forged one they could never touch. Because it was never real, and you cannot pay off a thing that does not exist. This was the machine. This was how a man kept a whole settlement in his hand, year after year, generation after generation. This was how 40 families stayed poor and bound while one man stayed a king. Not by hard prices and hard luck, by forgery, by the courthouse book itself. Verna Tolliver stood in that quiet office with the tall shelves and the smell of old paper, and the whole shape of it stood up in front of her at last. And it was so much bigger than her one folded ticket that it made her small and made her large at the very same time. It was not her grievance anymore. It could not be. It was Silas's, and the widow Amos's, and the children's, and every soul on that land. The thing that had been done to punish her for one step backward from a desk was the same thing that had been done to all of them, in the dark, with a pen. And she was the only one who had the tin. She was the only one who had kept, by pure blind love, 6 years of the true figures. She was the only one on that whole place who could read the lie and prove it. She did not go home to grieve. Understand that. That is the hinge of the whole story, and I want you to hear it plain. A lesser person and a truer-to-life person would have gone home and wept and been thankful to be shut of the place with her skin. Verna did not. She stood at that counter and she asked the clerk, quiet, for a scrap of paper and the loan of his pen. And she copied. Lien numbers. Filing dates. Book and page. The wording of the entries. The names. She copied it small and neat, and when the scrap was full she asked the clerk, calm as buying thread, if he had another. She took out the Arbuckle tin lid from her bag, the tin lid, and on the inside of it, in pencil, she began to write the numbers down where they could not be lost. Book, page, date, the private ledger of a private woman, kept inside the lid of a coffee tin against the public ledger of a lying man. She was not enduring anymore. She had decided. Somewhere between reading her own forged X and reading Silas Hobbs's she had crossed over, and she was not a woman being robbed now. She was a woman building a case. She thought it through on the long mule ride home, in the cold, with the tin lid heavy in her bag. She knew the law better than any tenant on the bend, better than Cathcart guessed a widow ever could. She knew that a lien was only as good as the mark that made it. She knew that a forged mark filed at the courthouse was not just a cheat, it was a crime. Forgery, fraud, the kind of thing that did not stay on the bend where Cathcart was king, but went up to the circuit court where he was only another man with a name in the book. She would need the tin. She had the tin. She would need someone to swear the marks were false. She knew where the old men were. She would need the store's own carbon duplicates, the copies the commissary kept of every real furnish, still stored, she would bet, in the gin office where she had once filed them herself with her own hands. And she would need the law. Real law. Not the sheriff who hunted with Cathcart. Someone from outside the county's little kingdom, someone whose authority did not bend to a landlord's table. She did not yet have a name for that person. But a hard drought had brought government men through Halford County that year. Relief men, and she had heard there was one still working the district. She rode home in the dark with all of it turning in her mind, cold and clear and steady. She put the mule up. She climbed the stairs to the one room over the feed store. Her children were asleep behind the curtain. She set the tin on the table. She lit the lamp low. And in that small light, over that battered coffee tin that had held nothing but a dead man's habit and a widow's love, Verna Tolliver sat down to begin the quiet work of taking a king apart with his own paper. She did not know yet that he would strike back. She did not know that a warrant would be sworn against her, or that Luther Pruitt would come up those very stairs one night to take the tin off that very table. She did not know how close it would run, or how many times she would nearly be caught. She only knew the two numbers did not come from the same man's hand. And she knew she could read. The gin office had not changed in 6 years. Same tin roof, same smell of cotton dust and machine oil. Verna knew the lock on the side door because she had once carried the key. She came on a Sunday after she dropped Miss Dosia at the church door. The old woman patted her hand and asked no questions. Verna drove the mule down the back lane, past the cotton yard, to the low shed where the gin office sat dark. The carbons were where she had left them, filed by year, by name, in a long flat drawer under the scale table. She had put them there herself one winter, with these two hands. She knew the drawer stuck. She knew to lift it before she pulled. She found her own furnish first. Tom's name. Her name after. Every real ticket, the true figures, in blue carbon gone soft with age. She laid them beside the tickets from the tin. They agreed. Line for line, they agreed. And neither one came near the courthouse number. Then she reached for Silas Hobbs. That was when she heard the horse. She did not run. Running is what a guilty person does, and a guilty person is what she could not afford to look like. She slid the drawer shut. She stepped back into the shadow of the scale post. She put her hands in her apron and made herself breathe slow. Luther Pruitt came up the lane on the big bay. He wore his hat low. He did not get down. He sat the horse in the cotton yard and looked at the shed a long moment, the way a man looks at a thing he half remembers to be wrong. Anybody there? Verna did not answer. A person who answers is a person who is there. She stood still. The bay stamped and blew. A cat crossed the yard. Luther spat. He turned the horse, and he rode on toward the store, easy, in no hurry, a man with nowhere he had to be. Verna waited until the sound of him was gone into the trees. Then she took the carbons she came for, folded them flat, and slid them inside her Bible, where a man like Luther would never think to look. She locked the shed. She drove the mule home in the plain Sunday light, and her hands did not start to shake until she was 2 miles gone. Relief is a strange thing. It comes after, not during. During, there is only the work. She had the tin. Now she had the carbons. She needed the old men. Silas Hobbs was past 70 and could not read a word. But he could count. He had counted his own bales by memory for 30 years, and he had never once been off. Verna went to him on a Wednesday, when the field was empty and the light was long. and she sat on the split-log bench by his door, and she did not rush him. "Silas," she said, "how many years have you drawn furnish you never took?" The old man looked at his hands. "3," he said. 3 years running. Coffee I never drank. A mule collar I never seen." I told the boy at the desk. The boy said the book was the book. "The book is wrong," Verna said. "And I can prove it. But I need you to say so. Not to me. To a man with a seal." Silas was quiet a while. A mockingbird ran through its whole set of borrowed songs. Then he said, "I can't write my name." "You can make your mark," Verna said. "Your true one, in front of a notary who'll swear you made it. That's all the law wants. The true mark made by the true hand." He looked at her. Old eyes gone pale at the rims but steady. "They put me off the land for this?" "Maybe. I'm too old to be scared of it," Silas said. And he almost smiled. She got 5 of them. Silas and the widow Amos and 2 of the Renfro men and old Pruitt's own cousin who had no love for Luther. She drove them to town one at a time, on different days, so no 2 would be seen together. The notary was a dry little man in the back of the drugstore who charged a dime a mark and asked nothing. One by one they set their true marks on a plain sheet that said, in Verna's own careful hand, that they had never borrowed the sums the county book laid against them. It was on the 4th mark that the near thing came. Verna had just walked the widow Amos out to the wagon when Emmett Cathcart came down the plank sidewalk with Luther half a step behind. He stopped in front of the drugstore. He looked at Verna. He looked at the widow. He tipped his hat the way a man does when he means the opposite of courtesy. "Ms. Tolliver," he said, "you're a long way from your wash." "Yes, sir," Verna said. Just carrying the widow to the doctor. Her knees. Cathcart's eyes went past her, to the drugstore door, to the dark shape of the notary at his desk in the back. Verna felt her heart go up into her throat, and she kept her face as plain as a plowed field. Cathcart went inside. She heard him say, "Easy," to the notary. "Somebody been in here today needs my witness? I got tenants can't sign their own names." And the dry little notary, who charged a dime and asked nothing and told nothing, said, "Just folks about their own business, Mr. Cathcart. Nothing that wants a landlord's hand." Cathcart came back out. He looked at Verna one more time, long, the way you look at a card you can't quite read. Then he went on down the walk, and Luther went with him, and the widow Amos let out a breath like she had been under water. "He knows," the widow said. "He suspects," Verna said. "That's not the same. A man can't hang you for what he suspects." But she drove home slow that day, and she watched the road behind her. Now she needed the law. Real law. Not the sheriff who hunted quail with Cathcart and drank his whiskey. Someone from outside the little kingdom. The drought had brought government men through Halford County that year, and one was still working the district. A young field agent for the Resettlement Administration named Alton Reese. He kept a desk 2 days a week in the back of the post office. And he saw folks whose land had blown or burned or drowned. Verna went to him with the tin under her arm, wrapped in a flour sack, and she set it on his desk, and she opened it, and she laid the whole thing out, plain, the way she laid everything out. Reese was young. He had ink on his fingers and a way of listening that did not interrupt. He took up her tickets and the carbons and the paper with the true furnish figures, and he read the numbers Verna had copied off the courthouse book onto the inside of the tin lid. He read a long time. The post office clock ticked. Outside a wagon went by. "Mrs. Tolliver," he said at last. "Do you understand what you have here?" "I understand it doesn't add," she said. "It's more than that." He set the lid down careful, like it might break. A crop-lien is a legal instrument, filed at the county. Sworn, when a man files a lien for a debt that was never borrowed and puts a mark on it the borrower never made and gets it witnessed, that's not padding a bill. That's forgery. That's fraud. Both indictable. "And he did it," Reese said, turning the lid to the lamp, "not once. He did it to every family on that place. I know it," Verna said. Reese looked at her then like he was seeing her for the first time. "How long did it take you to work this out?" "I clerked his daybook one winter," she said. "I know his hands. And I can read slow." She almost smiled. "Turns out slow is all it takes, if you keep at it." Reese told her the thing she most needed to hear. The fall term of the circuit court sat in 26 days. Not the county court, where Cathcart's friends were. The circuit court, with a judge who rode in from 3 counties over and owed the man nothing. If the paper was in the prosecutor's hands before the grand jury met, it would be heard. 26 days. Verna did one more thing before she let it go to the law. It was the thing that made the rest of it clean, though she did not think of it that way at the time. She sat at the table over the feed store, under the low lamp, and she wrote Emmett Cathcart a note. Plain, no threat in it. Just the truth, laid square, the way she laid everything. "Mr. Cathcart, the books at the courthouse and the tickets in my tin do not agree. You may want to make them agree before someone else reads both." She did not sign it with love or fear. She signed it with her name. She had the Renfro boy carry it out to the bend. And she waited. Cathcart read it on his porch, they said later, and he laughed. He put it in his coat pocket like a joke he'd tell at supper. A widow's bluff. A washing woman playing lawyer. He did not make the books agree. He did not so much as ride to town to look. He thought he had all the time in the world. He had 26 days. The detonation came quiet, the way the true things do. There was no shouting. There was a room at the back of the courthouse, the prosecutor's room, with a table and 3 men and a widow. Reese was there, the county prosecutor, a heavy man named Doggett who chewed a cold cigar and said little, and the foreman of the grand jury, a farmer from the far side of the county who had never so much as met Emmett Cathcart. Verna set the tin on the table. She opened it. And this time she did not lay out one family's grief. She laid out the machine. Here was her lien. Here was her true furnish, in the tin and again in the store's own carbon. Here was the courthouse number, forged. Here was Silas Hobbs, 3 years of furnish he never drew, his true mark sworn before a notary against the false X on the county book. Here was the widow Amos. Here were the Renfros. Here was the same hand, over and over, filing the same lie against family after family, all of it witnessed. Verna set her finger on the name, by one Luther Pruitt, who had signed as witness to marks that were never made in front of him. Doggett took the cold cigar out of his mouth. He looked at the carbons a long time. He looked at the courthouse liens Reese had pulled and laid beside them. He held one up to the window, and then the other, so the 2 X marks sat one over the other in the light. "That's not the same hand," Doggett said. "No, sir," Verna said. "It isn't." The foreman leaned in. "Whose hand made both those marks?" "The same one," Doggett said slow. "That's the whole crime of it. The borrower's mark and the forger's mark are the same hand. And it isn't the borrower's." He set the papers down. He looked at Verna across the table, at the battered coffee tin between them with a dead man's habit inside it, and he said the words she had ridden 11 miles in the dark to earn. "Mrs. Tolliver, this is going to the grand jury." Then Cathcart struck back. She had known he would. She had said so herself that first night over the lamp, though she had not known which way the blow would fall. It fell at night. It fell as a warrant. Emmett Cathcart could not unforge a lien. But he could do what men of his kind always do. He could turn the crime around and pin it on the one who found it. He swore out a paper before the county judge, his friend, claiming that Verna Tolliver had broken into his gin office and stolen the commissary's carbon duplicates. Theft, her word against his, and his word was the word that ran Halford County. Luther Pruitt came for the tin. He came up the outside stairs to the one room over the feed store, boots heavy on the wood, a little after 9. The children were behind the curtain, Cora 11 and little Tom 9, both dead asleep. Verna heard him on the stairs and she knew the sound of him. She stood up from the table. She moved the tin behind her without hurry. Luther did not knock. He pushed the door and filled it. He had the warrant in one hand and a lantern in the other. "You know what this is," he said. "I can read," Verna said. "Judge says you stole company property, says you took papers out of the gin. I'm to bring the tin and whatever's in it." He held the lantern up and looked past her, at the table, at the shape of the thing behind her back. "Give it here and it goes easy. Make me take it and it goes hard and them children watch." For one long breath, the whole thing hung on the edge. The tin. 6 years of a dead man's habit and a widow's love and a king's undoing, all in one battered can, and a big man in the doorway with the law's paper and the strength to take it. Verna did not hand it over. "You can take that tin, Luther," she said, quiet, so as not to wake the children. "You can carry it to Emmett Cathcart tonight, and the two of you can burn it in his stove." "And it won't matter." "Won't matter," Luther said. "No," she looked at him steady, "because Mr. Reese photostated every page of it a week ago. Every ticket, every carbon, every mark. Filed certified copies with the circuit court over in the next county, where your judge's paper doesn't reach. Whatever you take out of this room tonight is already on record where you can't get it." She let that sit. "You'd be stealing an empty can, Luther, and swearing a false theft to cover a real forgery. On top of the false witness you already swore. That's 3 lies deep. How many you think you can stand on before one gives?" Luther Pruitt stood in the doorway a long time. The lantern shook, just a little, in his hand. Behind the curtain a child turned in sleep. He looked at the tin. He looked at the woman. He was a writing boss, not a thinker, and you could watch the sum of it working through him slow. Take the can, gain nothing, sink deeper. Or set it down. "He told me it was all square," Luther said, "and it came out low, almost to himself. He told me the marks was made and I was just to sign under. I never." He stopped. He looked at his own big hand holding the warrant. "I signed under a lot of marks." "I know you did," Verna said. "It's on every one of them." Luther Pruitt turned around. He went back down the stairs the way he came, and he took nothing, and Verna heard him ride off into the dark toward the bend. She stood a while with her hands still on the tin. Then she sat down at the table, and only then, in the empty room, did she let her legs go weak. The paper was safe. It had been safe a week. But there is knowing a thing and there is feeling it, and she did not feel it until the boots were gone. The fall term of the circuit court opened on a bright cold morning, and the square filled with wagons. They came from all over the Cathcart Bend. Silas Hobbs came, in the one coat he owned. The widow Amos came, the Renfros came, all of them, and the 40-odd tenant families who had stood in the settlement line the day Verna was put off the land came now and filled the courthouse square, their mules tied to every rail, their children on the wagon beds, the same faces that had watched her fold that ticket and walk away. She came back to the same ground. That was the shape of it. The porch had thrown her out before all these eyes. Now the courthouse would call her name before the same eyes, and this time she would not fold anything and walk away. Inside, the room was packed to the walls. The circuit judge sat high and plain and owed nobody. Doggett stood with his cold cigar in his pocket and his papers squared. And on the council table, in front of the whole county, Verna Tolliver set down a battered Arbuckle coffee tin. The prosecutor read the count aloud. Forgery of a recorded instrument. Fraud. He read the number of forged crop-liens filed against the families of Cathcart Bend, and it was a long number, and the room went still as he read it. Then the clerk took up the county lien book, the same book Verna had paid a dime to see, and one by one, on the judge's order, he drew his pen through the forged liens and wrote void in the margin, and called each name as he did it. Hobbs. Voided. Silas Hobbs stood up in the back of the room. An old man past 70 who could not read the word that freed him. But he heard his name, and he heard voided, and he took his hat off and held it to his chest. Amos. Voided. Renfro. Voided. Name after name. Family after family. each one a debt that had bound a household to a landlord's land, struck through in ink in a single morning. Verna stood by the council table with her hand resting on the cold lid of the tin, and she watched the machine come apart, page by page, in the same book where it had been built. "Tolliver," the clerk said. $186.40. Voided. Verna did not cry. She had promised herself she would not. Not in this room. Not before these faces. She only pressed her hand flat on the tin lid. Once, the way you press a hand on a shoulder, and she thought of Tom, who had saved every ticket out of nothing but habit and never once thought it would come to this. Then they put Luther Pruitt on the stand. Doggett did not badger him. He did not have to. He laid a lien in front of Luther and asked him one thing. "Is that your signature, Mr. Pruitt? There, on the witness line?" Luther looked at it. The whole room looked at Luther. "Yes, sir, and this mark here, above your name. The borrower's mark. Did you see the borrower make it?" Luther was quiet. A big man in his good shirt, sweating in the cold room. He knew what a lie cost now. He had stood in a doorway a week past and counted how deep a man could sink on lies, and he had turned around. "No, sir," he said. "I didn't see it made." "Any of them? Any of the marks you witnessed on the Cathcart Bend, did you see a single one of them made by the hand that owned the name?" The courtroom held its breath. "No, sir," Luther said. "I signed under what Mr. Cathcart put in front of me. He said the marks was made. I never saw one made." He swallowed. "I never read a one of them, neither. I can't hardly read." His own name, on his own signature line, convicted the man he had signed for. There was no undoing it. A witness who never witnessed is a confession dressed as a signature, and Luther had put his down on every forged lien on the place. When he came down off the stand, he had to pass the front bench where the old men sat. Silas Hobbs was there. Luther Pruitt, who had ridden that boss horse up and down the bend for years and never once got off it for a tenant, could not lift his eyes to the old man's face. He looked at the floor. He walked past, and he looked at the floor the whole way. That was the price of it. Not jail, not yet. That would come. Just an old man's eyes he could no longer meet. The rest fell in an afternoon, the way a wall falls once the one stone is pulled. With the liens void, every tenant on the Cathcart Bend was legally free of the fabricated furnish debt. That was the thing the whole scheme had been built to prevent. A crop-lien is a chain, and the chain held the labor to the land you could not leave while you owed. And Cathcart's book said everyone owed. Forever. Whether they'd borrowed or not. Strike the liens and the chains fell off all at once, 40-odd families, free and square, in a single morning, standing in a square full of their own wagons. And Emmett Cathcart's whole hold on the Bend evaporated with it. But it did not stop there. It went one turn further, the way these things do when a man builds his own kingdom on paper. Cathcart had borrowed against those very liens. His note at the bank, the money he ran the store on, the money that made him a merchant and not just a farmer, was secured by the crop liens of his tenants. Those liens were his collateral. And the court had just declared his collateral to be forgery. The bankman was in the courtroom. Verna saw him leave before the session even closed, walking fast, his face gone the color of ash. By the end of the week, the bank had called Cathcart's note. Every dollar. Secured by paper that no longer existed, that had never legally existed, that a widow's coffee tin had proven was a lie. The reward for the honest and the fall of the cruel. In the same room, in the same hour, Silas Hobbs walked out of that courthouse free of a debt he never made. And Emmett Cathcart walked out owing more than he could pay, with nothing left to secure it, his labor gone, his book void, his witness turned against him. He did not come apart in the courtroom. Men like that never do. He sat gray and still and he watched his kingdom struck through in ink, and he said nothing, because there was nothing left to say that a book would not contradict. He came to her 3 weeks later, hat in hand. It was evening. Verna was at the table over the feed store, and the children were doing their letters by the lamp, and there were boots on the outside stairs again, but slow this time. Tired, an old man's climb. She opened the door, and Emmett Cathcart stood there, smaller than she had ever seen him, his hat turning in his hands. "Ms. Tolliver," he said, "I wonder if I could have a word." She let him stand in the door. She did not ask him in. "I've come to ask you a kindness," Cathcart said. "This whole business, the books, it got away from a man. Bookkeeping, you know how a big place is. Figures get put down wrong, and once they're down," he tried to smile. "It did not sit on his face, if you'd sign a statement, just that it was all a mistake in the keeping of the books. Honest error. It would go easier. For everybody. For those families, even. Drag it through the court and it hurts folks. You and me both know that." Verna looked at him a long moment. The man who had put his hand on hers over the ledger. The man who had told her a woman who wouldn't be neighborly could find another county to starve in. The man who had read out that she owed him after a full crop and cleared her house by Saturday in front of 40 families. She did not raise her voice. She never once, through the whole of it, raised her voice. "Mr. Cathcart," she said, "I'll say exactly what the courthouse book says. Same as you'd have had it say about me." He stood there. The hat stopped turning. "That's all I've got to say," Verna said. "It's all I ever said. The book's the book. You told a man that yourself once, down at the desk. Your writing boss told Silas Hobbs the same. The book's the book." She put her hand on the door. "Ours agrees now. Yours doesn't. That's the whole of it." Emmett Cathcart went back down the stairs into the dark, and he took nothing with him, because there was nothing left to take. Spring came to Halford County the next year soft and early. Verna Tolliver stood on a real porch in the first warm light and watched her cotton come up green. It was rented land, an honest 40 on the far side of the county, rented from a man who kept a plain book and charged a plain rent and furnished nothing he did not deliver. It was not much. But every acre of it was square, and she owed no man a mark she had not made. Her coffee cooled on the porch rail. Down the lane, Cora and little Tom walked to the schoolhouse with their dinners in a pail. And no furnished debt in any county book could reach out and pull them back to a field. That was the thing she had bought with the tin. Not money. There had never been much money in it. She had bought a morning where her children walked to school and kept walking. Silas Hobbs put in his own cotton that spring, free and square, on land he rented in his own name. He could not read the lease. But he had Verna read it to him twice, slow, and he made his true mark on it, the real one, in front of a man who watched him make it. The rest of them scattered where free people scatter. Some stayed on the bend, which was sold off now in parcels, the great place broken up the way it had broken others. Emmett Cathcart was bound over for the spring term of the circuit court, and he did not run the store anymore, because there was no store to run and no note to run it on. Luther Pruitt drifted. Folks said he went to another county to hire on somewhere they had not heard his name. He took the floor with him, the habit of looking at it, wherever he went. Verna kept the tin. She set it on the shelf by the stove in the rented house, the same place Tom had always kept it, and she did not open it anymore. She did not have to. Everything it once held was on record now, certified, in a book 3 counties over where no landlord's hand could reach. The tin was empty. She kept it anyway. A body keeps the thing that carried it through. Some evenings, with the coffee cooling and the children's voices coming up the lane, she would look at that battered can on the shelf and think how close it had run. How many times a man like Cathcart had bet that a quiet woman could not read the fine print, and how he had bet wrong. Because quiet is not the same as slow, and slow is not the same as beat. She read slow. She had always read slow. But she had learned a thing worth more than speed, and it was this. A woman who reads slow reads sure. She does not skip. She does not tire. She goes line by line, mark by mark, ticket by ticket, until the 2 numbers stand side by side in the lamplight and there is no more hiding which hand made which. The screen door was open. The warm wind moved the curtain. On the shelf, the empty tin caught the last of the light and held it, plain and battered and done with its work. If you ever believed the quiet ones read the fine print, now you know how far it can carry. Comment the town you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels.